Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the video. I'm GetGoodGuy, and we're going to put on a happy demeanor today for what is a not particularly happy video, I guess, but one that feels kind of necessary and informative at this point in time to kind of remind people what's going on and look at what can be done better. So it's something a bit different. I'm going to detail what I think the 5 biggest mistakes are that DICE have made with Battlefield 5. Because whether you like the game or not, and it's fine either way, it's near impossible to argue that BF5's life so far has been smooth sailing or gone anything like how a reasonable development studio would wish for it to go. And there have to be reasons for this, of course. Games don't just hit turbulent times for no reason, especially not when it seems to be constant. So if you personally want to get straight to the reasons, then please use the timestamp provided on screen right now. It'll take you to the main discussion. But if you have a slightly longer attention span and or like the sound of my voice, which some people absolutely don't, we'll quickly here go through a little background and explanation in order to properly set the scene and expectations moving forwards. So this video isn't designed to be a hit piece or a fresh batch of negativity. Let me really stress that. Now I'm putting this video out to show what not to do, to introduce you or remind you of how we got here with this game, and point towards hopefully a much brighter future for this series if similar events and decisions can be eradicated and avoided. Because nobody wants to see this happen, at least nobody in the right mind without ill-advised agendas. Yes, I'm looking at some of you, DICE management. Now of course there have been many mistakes involved with Battlefield 5's spluttering conception and proceeding decline, which is kind of a beautiful and disgusting statement actually. And there are many mistakes made for any game in fact. It's pretty much unavoidable for a piece of content of such a scale with so many people involved. So today this isn't a definitive list, it's my opinion. There's obviously been roadmap delays and cancellations, questionable monetization decisions, a lack of anti-cheat, and so many other things that I don't feature today. It's not that they're not important, but it's because I instead decided to focus upon clear, definable events rather than long-term issues. So feel free to leave your list of the 5 biggest mistakes in the comments below that DICE have made with Battlefield 5 in your opinion, and we can kind of create a hub of what at least a section of this community feels DICE could avoid and handle better in future for superior results and customer satisfaction. Right, let's kick this off, and the first mistake I'm going to cover is the reveal trailer. The much maligned reveal trailer, and I'll play it in the background while I talk about this. It was just so not Battlefield, I guess is how many people felt. At least not the Battlefield that many expected. And of course sometimes change is fine and can in fact be encouraged if implemented properly. But that's not how this went. Now I must admit that I felt it was a pretty good trailer, and I still do, but, and there's a big but, that doesn't mean it was a good trailer for Battlefield. If this had been a trailer for some new game we hadn't seen before, then it's a pretty good effort. But for Battlefield, everything that goes into it, the player base it has, what's expected of it, the expectations built up by DICE themselves and all that kind of stuff, it just didn't fit. It was the first warning sign that something was different this time, something was off. Not that I recognized that at the time either. I came out saying 2 things. 1, that people shouldn't freak out because women were in World War II, as this was something that was highly complained about in the trailer of course, and that I figured everything we saw in the trailer would be tied together in a fittingly Battlefield way, that can also be adequately linked to reality, like the prosthetic arm for example, which seems kind of insane when I think about it. I mean, there are reports that there were some prosthetics, but you probably couldn't use them with a rifle like that and all kinds of stuff. And I wasn't trying to say that it would be 100% historically accurate and realistic, as Battlefield just in general isn't, but close enough to stay in line with the series so far. And my second point was that few people would really care about that stuff as long as the game was good long term, well produced and supported. And I was both wrong and right. But before I tell you why, take a look at the Battlefield 1 reveal trailer that blew everyone away. Got the wider gaming world hyped up, not just Battlefield fans. It was a pure BF trailer that was executed to near perfection. That's how it's done. And think about what the Battlefield 5 trailer lacked in terms of having the same kind of style and atmosphere compared to what I'm about to show you. Okay, but then I realized I need to replace the audio in the background of the trailer so I could avoid a copyright strike because yay, doing things on YouTube. So I gave it a go and it's not very good, but I hope the idea of how good it was still comes across. Yeah, let's do this. Now that's a trailer. That's a piece of content. For me, that was a masterpiece. And as well executed as Battlefield 5's trailer was, it wasn't like that. And it wasn't the Battlefield feel that existing fans were looking for. This is why the new content trailers for BF5 since have been much more like Battlefield 1's trailers or previous Battlefield trailers. So how was I right and wrong in my initial impressions of it? Well, I was right about saying how very few would eventually care about the issues as long as DICE did a good job with the game. But unfortunately, the common opinion is that they haven't done a good job overall. And it's hard to really argue against that. And then I was wrong about them bringing it all together in a neat and acceptable fashion because I was just naive. I just didn't expect them to kind of make the mess that they have, and also have some people involved at DICE that have such agendas that affect the game in the way that we've seen. Not just your devs you see on Twitter and stuff. I don't necessarily mean them at all. They're doing as they're told, most of them. I mean upper management. I know so much more now than I did when the BF5 trailer was released, and that revealed trailer was an early look at the problems we've since dealt with on a regular basis. But enough about that, let's move on to a different big mistake. Number 2, the infamous don't like it, don't buy it. This came from Patrick Soderlund, an individual who no longer works for DICE or EA, but he was at the time, I believe, EA's chief design officer, or at least that's what some articles report. Regardless, he was very high up in the decision-making process of Battlefield 5, and he really screwed up, to be honest with you, because it's not always about what you say, but how and why you say it. If someone doesn't like something, then they shouldn't buy it. That's fine. But when you present that as a hardline statement for a product the company you work for is producing for reasons that simply don't line up with the vast majority of the player base's desires, well, you have a problem, especially if your tone isn't on point, which it wasn't. Now, it's a shame that Battlefield, DICE, and EA have to keep being hit with the words that one former employee provided, but that's the reality of business. If your game doesn't succeed and you effectively come out and say, don't buy it if you don't want to, well, you can't have many complaints. Especially when it turns out you took a stand because your daughter wanted to play as a female in World War II. Especially when it turns out you were, I quote, standing up for a cause. And especially when you essentially call people out for being uneducated when you have provided a product that doesn't accurately depict the women that did fight in World War II. And you leaned heavily upon the statement that things are plausible. That's called creating a grey area. You can't do that when initially the game was pushed as being somewhat historically accurate and realistic. You can't do that when untold stories, at least some of them, just become basically fictional stories. And you can't do that whilst throwing it in the faces of your customers, who are, at least some of them, rightfully disappointed. For the majority, it was never about women being in the game, as I naively thought it might have been back then. It was about agendas and individual desires sullying the overall product. This now feeds into the purchasable soldier skins hampering some players' immersion and making it impossible to tell which class an enemy is sometimes, and how to combat them. And this altogether shows how just one mistake can spiral into a massive issue. But let's move on, as I'm probably diving too deep into all of these points and getting carried away. Next up is the TTK change of late 2018. Yep, when DICE changed the time to kill of the entire game a little after it was released, right in time for Christmas, and an influx of new and less able players, with the excuse that it was to try to combat the time to death network issues, which was absolutely laughable. Anyone with a decent understanding of the game back then knew that didn't add up and informed the community that that was the case. The community rebelled and DICE changed it back, with the idea that they listened to the community being pushed. And at the time, I kind of praised that because, you know, you should give credit where it's due, or where it appears to be due. That now doesn't seem like it was the right idea, as I'll go on to explain later on. But this hurt Battlefield. This was the first really big indicator that DICE would act in a way that seemingly didn't line up with what most of the player base wanted, the existing player base. That they were willing to make sweeping changes and alter the overall feel of the game, especially if it attracted new players, potentially more casual players. It shaved a few players off the existing player base and was another early event that caused controversy, something this game has seemingly never been able to avoid since, and has likely put many potential players off even trying the game. A picture is becoming more clear here of how a poor reputation was formed for this game, and people often won't spend their money trying a game like that. Look at what happened to Anthem, when there are so many other games to choose from, so many great games. Okay, so moving on now to mistake number 4, the DICE event with the leaked pictures. The DICE event that featured I can't quite believe this is real still to this day, by the way. The DICE event that featured a massive hashtag everyone's Battlefield, basically backing up Patrick Soderlund's comments from earlier. earlier. Well, spoiler alert, you generally can't make a product for everyone. It doesn't work. Take Battlefield 5 as being a shining example of this. And of course, it was also the event that featured quotes from the community surrounding the hashtag everyone's Battlefield image, basically mocking the community. Now, I probably don't need to explain why this is terrible PR. It's just awful. They're not an individual content creator. They're not one person. It's a brand. It's a studio. And you just can't really act like that. Even if some of the things that were said to them and about them were terrible, you can't really go about it this way, and you definitely can't lump them in with all the other people that are criticizing the game for relevant reasons, which is how it came across, whether they wanted it to or not. This just wasn't a good move. It wasn't worth the risk of it getting leaked. And the leak itself, accidental or otherwise, caused a massive public relations nightmare because duh, obviously, never ever do this, ever. It's dumb, and DICE, you messed this one up big time. I can't honestly believe some things that have happened with that studio in the past year to year and a half. And your statement about being on the right side of history was in poor taste and cringeworthy, especially now looking back at it. And now finally, my fifth big mistake, the TTK change that we've just gone through and are still experiencing, / having tweaks made to, / playing in combination with changes to reduce recoil and increased auto-rotation with controllers. My god, that's a lot. Yes, I know most of you will be tired by now of hearing about the timescale changes, but it's very relevant, because while some people like it and support it, and that's fine, and while some elements of it are actually okay, or sometimes actually good, when you combine it with everything now pretty much being a laser beam, it's just not satisfying for most players. The skill gap is closed, and the skill floor and skill ceiling are both way lower. Almost everything is so easy to use, but combined with greater survivability at range as well, it's just not what most people signed up for. They can of course do whatever they want with their game, but the player base don't have to be happy about it, especially when they already bought the game in a previous state, especially after a TTK change before that was reverted, and we were given the indication this wouldn't happen again, at least not in the face of what most players say they want. A lot of these gunplay changes are clearly designed to make the game easier and more forgiving for new and less able players, and it's another slap in the face for the existing loyal player base. A player base you're just kinda lucky to have anymore, to be honest. Since Battlefield 5 was released, it's been a utter shit show. In case you haven't noticed, DICE, it's been embarrassing, and my positive demeanor has slipped, so let's bring it back. I don't want this to just be another whingy video, of course, so let's carry on. This player base now continues to dwindle, and the snap lock-on aim assist implementation with controllers over a year after release, well, that's just the icing on the cake. I can't tell you how many comments I've received from players who have finally just given up after these recent gunplay changes. The gunplay was pretty much the only element of the game that was widely praised and has now been neutered and watered down. It's not about some guns just not killing as quickly at certain ranges. It's about the game feeling totally different to some players. It's about weapon balance being destroyed in the process, which I promise you, it truly has been. And it's about DICE changing things that nobody asked for, while we sit and wait for more content and bug fixes, using the same few guns if we actually want to compete. DICE, sort it out. Stop making these egregious errors. The game has been out for a little over a year, and this list could have been 10 or 20 big mistakes. And DICE management, some of you lead designers for certain roles, you're killing the game. Whether you realize it or not, you are. Stop or quit. This is why there's a revolving door at DICE, with people leaving and new people coming in, and it's why things keep getting worse. Some people working at DICE are not satisfied with this. So again, some of the people in key management positions causing these problems, please stop or quit. And that's what I have to say today. Not a rant as such, although it did get kind of ranty in places, but highlighting the issues and just wishing things were better. Don't forget to let me know what you think has gone wrong with BF5, and yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video, at least in some fashion. If you did, I'd appreciate you leaving a like, as always. You know about subscribing and turning on notifications, so, just do it if you haven't. That'd be that'd be great. And feel free to follow my stream and join my Discord server in the description and my pinned comment. Here's to Board of Awesome for the epic people who support the channel on Patreon. They're all absolute heroes, and I love them all deeply and, of course, often. If you want to join them on the Board of Awesome, the link to the Patreon page is in the description and my pinned comment. And with that all said, I am GetGoodGuy, and I will see you next time. Laters. It's the system I personally now much prefer, both when playing solo and in a group. It's team play, but it isn't forced. I also feel that BF1 has generally more compelling weapons, with much more differentiated roles, but not being strictly limited to really narrow ranges of viability, at least most of the time. And more guns actually offer a purpose.